We all are only 1 degree removed from knowing someone who is being impacted by workplace violence or some form of online exploitation. This issue filters into employee wellness, impacting engagement at work. Let's bridge this gap by bringing awareness and education to these pressing issues and shield the vulnerable. We all are only 1 degree removed from knowing someone who has been impacted by workplace violence or some form of online exploitation. And these issues filter into employee wellness, impacting engagement at work. Let's bridge the gap by bringing awareness, leadership, and education to these pressing issues and shield the vulnerable. I'm really excited for today's guest, Brent Yonk. Brent, you are the author of the Get Into Leadership Shape newsletter. But before we dive into that, you, as you described it, it's a bit of a word salad job description. You work for the FBI. You are the section chief for the FBI Counterterrorism Division's Technology and Data Innovation Section. How you remember that every single day, what it is that you do is beyond me. That is an amazingly long title. But in addition to, you said that's your day job.
Yes.
And you are a certified emotional intelligence and leadership coach. You're a speaker and author, as I said, of the Get Into Shape newsletter. And I know from following you on LinkedIn and conversations in the past that leadership is it's a topic that you are super, super passionate about. So thank you, Brent, for joining us here today.
Of course, happy to be here.
Awesome. So Brent, you're married with 2 daughters. You're originally from northern Utah.
Yep.
You have lived several years. You lived in Brazil. You said that you love scuba diving as much as you enjoy skiing. You've been from the ocean to the mountains and everywhere in between. And you said working with the FBI has afforded you that opportunity to travel and really begin to speak on topics of leadership and emotional intelligence with a lot of cultural experience in between. I think it's going to be a really great conversation here, Brent. When we first met, one of the things that you said to me, and it really stood out, was so we know, and you know probably better than anybody working in the role that you do with the FBI, that we have so much happening in this world right now. There is so much chaos, but it's chaos that is out of our own personal control. And you tied this back. You said, when you think of a leader, what do you think of? And if it's not you, then you're missing the point. Elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I have gained some deep insight into over my time, both within the FBI, but also in my former career within the private sector, is there's a broad belief, I think, in many of us that leadership and the title of leader is confined to somebody else, right? When we're asked, who's a leader, rarely do we think of ourselves first. And the challenge that presents itself there, especially given the context of the world in which we now live, where ambiguity and complexity and uncertainty are all around us, is that by not looking inward, by not recognizing our own leadership abilities, we're acquiescing or we're giving up much of the control that we still do have, that we still do retain. The ability to make decisions, impactful choices that will shape the direction, and I apologize for the lights in here, that really shape the direction of our lives and of where we're going to go and what we can potentially achieve. What you'll find in some of the most motivated and impactful individuals is they recognize their leadership capacity early on, and they learn how to tap into it, and they learn how to leverage it to be able to control the direction of their lives. They can't control every variable. They can't impact a lot of the different things that are going to happen to them, but they are able to be very intentional and be very focused about how they're going to respond. And so one of the things that I'm passionate about, and it ties directly into emotional intelligence, is being able to understand yourself, understand all of this bundle of emotions and thoughts and feelings that you have, and then learning how to shape and direct those to be able to take the actions and make the decisions that you need to set yourself up for success, irrespective of what the external environment may look like, and having the ability to adapt and remain flexible no matter what may happen outside of your control. So really one of the passions that I've had, one of the missions that I have adopted is to help people tap into their internal leadership abilities and to recognize that whether you carry a title or not, that does not dictate whether or not you can be or are a leader.
Hmm.
And so that's really what I think that that means. My mission is to help everybody recognize their internal leader and learn how to tap into that.
So, and you said very early on, I forget the exact words here, but very early on that people recognize their leadership abilities. Are, this is a question
Mhm.
that I know a lot of people have. Are leaders born or are leaders made? Are we all born with that innate ability to lead? And I truly believe before you can lead other people, you have to learn to lead self. If you can't lead yourself, and I think that really bolts on your point of if it's not you, then you're missing the point of what you think of when you look at, when you think of a leader, what do you
Yeah.
think of? Are leaders born or are they made? Is it a
Yeah.
combo
So
of
the answer,
both?
yeah, the answer is both. Born in the sense that every single person has the potential. We all have the capacity to be a leader. And if you really distill it down to its basic form, I mean, you have to lead yourself, right? Even if you don't think of it in that frame of reference, you wake up in the morning and you're going to decide what you're going to do. What's that next thing you're going to do? You may not recognize that as leadership, but that's what it is. You are choosing to direct where your energy and your focus is going.
Hmm.
Or maybe for people that may be in a really hard spot in their lives, maybe they're choosing to not do that thing or to not do anything. So every single person, all of us, we have the ability to be a leader, even if it's just for ourselves. But at the same time, just because we have the capacity doesn't mean that we can actually take full advantage of it if we don't focus on how do we develop and improve upon that. And so I would say that leaders are born, but exceptional leaders are made, right?
I love that.
And yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, really, it's about first recognizing that you have the ability. Because if you don't recognize you have the ability, which I've seen countless people kind of just not have that recognition, you don't invest any of your time and energy into developing it, right?
Hmm.
It's like that hidden talent that you never are able to actually capitalize on. So the first step is to recognize you 100% absolutely are a leader. You have that capacity. And then when you recognize it, now you can start to ask yourself, what can I do to capitalize on it? How can I better develop this so that I can take more control over my life and over the course, that I'm charting?
So where does emotional intelligence play into this then? When people, because if everybody has these abilities, they're all born with it.
Mhm.
But you said exceptional leaders are made. I think, and I may be wrong by the statement, that leadership is a choice then that we make, whether or not we are going to do it or whether we are not. And sometimes we have to put that mirror up and look at the reflection and say, am I meeting the standard of being a leader for self first? But then we get into, a lot of conflict. And I think that's where the chaotic world controls a lot of decisions we make. It drives our emotional intelligence. And I may be wrong on a statistic. I'm not even going to throw out a statistic here, but I'll presume to guess that a large majority of people all start their day the same way now. The alarm goes off if they wake up by an alarm, and it's not an alarm clock that you got to get out of bed and walk across the room. It's the phone beside your bed. And
Yes.
everybody probably then turns to the very next thing. What's my social media? What's on there? And so they're letting this chaotic world fuel and feed their system the first thing they wake up when they wake up. Subsequent to that, when they go to bed, they're fueling and feeding their system of the
Mhm.
chaotic world of social media. before they go to bed. And those are the thoughts that they're going to bed with. From an emotional intelligence standpoint, now, when we know that most humans behave this way,
Yeah.
and we're looking at tying this into leadership and everything else going on outside of the circumstances that we don't have any personal control over,
Yes.
how does somebody mitigate that, tune into their emotional intelligence and say, I'm going to be a contributor. I am going to learn to lead self first.
Yeah. So I think the first part, right? The first step is, as any good therapist will tell you, is to recognize that you have a problem. So the habits and the routines that we develop and that are widespread these days with the portability of technology now, um, most of us have developed these very unhealthy habits where, to your point, we are constantly exposing ourselves to these messages. And it's important to recognize what the intention behind those messages is. The intention behind those messages isn't primarily to educate you, it isn't even primarily to inform you, it's to attract your attention and to retain it at all costs. And so when you recognize that, you can start to pick up on some of the nuanced ways in which they do this. And what they're doing is they're really hijacking your emotions. And so the way that emotional intelligence really plays into all of this is it gives you that awareness of those emotions that you have. And it gives you the opportunity to create a pause and to say, okay, am I going to allow the emotion to dictate what I do? Or am I going to recognize the emotion and then decide what I want to do? Um,
And that takes a conscious thought.
100%. Yeah. And this isn't like, this is certainly not groundbreaking. You'll have likely heard about different techniques that people use to try to do this, whether it's counting backwards from five, or you know, having certain types of like small routines that you use to kind of just break that moment. The point is that you start to take a moment to put intention into the decisions that you're making. You don't allow them to just fall back into the subconscious and just process like most of our habits do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Habits are a great thing, right? They are a function of evolution for us. And essentially what they do is they automate a lot of the decision making and thought processes that would have to go in to making certain choices for us. And so being able to consciously construct the habits that you want, right, such as brushing your teeth every day, making your bed, you know, doing push-ups when you get out of bed, like those are all great. They're constructive. They're helping to contribute to a healthier form of you. But it's also equally important that we recognize and we start to pay attention to those habits that are detrimental to our behavior and our performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing, hey, the alarm goes off, I roll over, grab my phone, and the first thing I do is I pull up my Twitter or X or Facebook or whatever. Like being able to recognize, is that the most important thing? Is that the priority for me? Is to see how many likes I got on my post, or to see what's the latest favorite food dish of my best friend. Like, hopefully, everybody recognizes that that's probably not one of the most important things for them in their life. There are
Mm-hmm.
probably other things that should take priority. And then, when recognizing that, saying, okay, how can I then start to replace this habit with a more productive habit? Right. So instead, it could be, okay, when the alarm goes off, I'm going to roll right out of bed and I'm going to do 20 push ups. Right. You're replacing it, you're putting something in there that has a healthy, productive benefit to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you space and a break between that previously unhealthy habit that you've got. And in that space, and so one of the reasons why I created the newsletter Get Into Leadership Shape, it's a wordplay for a couple of reasons. Obviously, I'm a proponent of helping people learn about and develop their leadership abilities, and most of the principles of becoming a better leader are very synonymous with the principles of getting into shape. And so being able to marry those two together, that works out really well. But it also gives us this opportunity to recognize that each of us has to make this conscious choice to put ourselves into a little bit of discomfort if we want to achieve growth. And one of the things that I see a lot in, whether it's in the workplace or in our communities, we tend to shy away from discomfort, right? We view
Big
discomfort
time.
in kind of a negative light. But the reality is that discomfort is actually our friend. Like it's the space, it's the opportunity for us to actually achieve growth. It's the opportunity for us to prove to ourselves that we can be more tomorrow than we are today. And
Right.
so by helping us to become more willing to step into that discomfort, we unlock so many more opportunities to build these habits, these abilities, these skills that are going to have uh, not only incremental, but just they're going to give us huge growth opportunities, and they're going to help us realize outcomes that we probably never imagined that we could achieve.
Yeah. Okay. I want to expand a little bit on the topic there of the subconscious mind,
Mhm.
because we consciously think that we're living, but I truly believe that we're being always driven by our subconscious mind. That's where our belief systems come in. That's where our thoughts come in, right? If I wake up every single day, or if I go to bed every single day, or all day long, I'm telling myself a negative thought pattern that gets into my sub.
Yes.
I'm going to consciously act it out. I'm going to behave in such a way. And when you talked about, we're just there's growth and discomfort, but a lot of people don't want to get uncomfortable in order to grow. And so, therefore, when we're exposed or faced with pain in our life, we turn to things that are pleasure. It can be alcohol, it can be sex, it can be social media, it can be binge watching Netflix for hours on end because we're avoiding that pain. But all of those things are going to continue to form our subconscious mind because while I'm seeking out that pleasure, I'm still continuing to feed my sub with all of the other negative thought patterns or the limiting
Yeah.
self-belief patterns, which then ultimately end up controlling maybe my emotional intelligence and how I end up reacting to things that may be out of my control. But from your perspective, from a leadership perspective, let's dive more into that subconscious topic and how
Yeah.
that works and then how we consciously do things.
Yeah. And the reality to recognize is that no matter how much you try to inundate your brain with distractions, right? Because in a lot of cases, right, if you're turning to a lot of those other activities, it's to create a distraction so that you don't have to consider those painful or uncomfortable things.
Hmm.
But the important thing to recognize is that your brain, no matter how much distraction you give it, it doesn't forget that thing. That
Right.
thing still lingers there. Um, and so the way that I kind of look at this is just like any type of device or machine, right? It's got all these parts that work in a system to produce certain outcomes. And your brain is very similar. The difference between like our phones or our cars, like we know how to break those down into their subparts to identify where problems may be occurring and then correct that thing and put it back together. And then it works more efficiently and it gives us the performance that we're looking for. But with our brains, oftentimes we, we, it's not quite as easy to pinpoint where the
Hmm.
problems may be. And so I think a lot of people that they just don't know how to approach this. They don't know what to turn to. There's some great options in the mental health industry, right? Talking to psychiatrists and therapists and they can absolutely help you in that thing. one of the practices that I have found that has really helped people to gain more intention, though, in choosing the behaviors and in recognizing where problems may be, is to start by cataloging what they're thinking, right? So instead of just having that thought, positive, negative, otherwise, and just trying to brush it off or trying to use something else to distract you away from it, is to start writing some of this down. You know,
Yeah.
a common practice, if you rewind maybe 40, 50, a century ago, it was a very common practice for people to journal
Hmm.
and to journal consistently. I mean, we can go back now and we can study the journals of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And that is a practice that I think has fallen out of kind of popular culture in recent memory, but it gave the people that use that opportunity to really try to understand the system that is up here in our head and to start to untangle it a little bit and to try to break it down into more of its sub parts so that they could start to understand what are the influences that are impacting me. You know, what are these different, whether it's self-sabotaging thoughts or whether it's the way that we're reacting to external feedback. You know, why why am I responding or reacting the way that I am? What do I want to achieve? Where do I want to go? You know, we spend a lot of time talking about like setting goals
Hmm.
in our society. We tend to be very goal focused, but I think we struggle to kind of see that thread between a goal and a broader purpose that motivates and drives us, right? So
A
there's like
deeper why.
a deeper why, right? So you've got some of the stuff that Simon Sinek has put out, that some of these other popular authors have put out about really kind of tapping into that why. And that's important because goals in and of themselves are relatively meaningless when you think about
Hmm.
it, right? And in fact, I think our overemphasis on goals tends to create more harm sometimes than good. Because at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of the time we fail to achieve those goals. And the problem is that we view that not as, well, let's keep going, let's keep building. We view it as, I can't even do that goal that I set, so why even try? I think that having that purpose, having that deeper understanding of what it is that we want to contribute to, that we want to move towards, helps us to view every single goal that we set not as like the end of anything, right? But simply as a measurement of where we want to be headed.
Hmm.
And when we fail to achieve it, or even when we do achieve it, we're not focused on the goal itself. We're focused on the growth that was achieved as we struggled for it.
Hmm.
And if you can focus on that, if your mindset is on the growth, big, small, otherwise, that you
Yeah.
achieve as you're striving for the goal, then you unlock a really incredible potential within yourself.
Well, it is. And I mean, I fall back on a statement, right? The goal isn't to get, it's to grow.
Yes.
And if we always have that goal of to get, I'm going to lose 40 pounds. I'm going to make $1 million. I'm going to do all these things. There needs to be the reflection of how am I growing as a person through this process? Uh, what is the emotional? Like you have to attach, people say, okay, yeah, this would be a goal of mine, but they're not attached to the feeling, not the feeling of the end result. If achieved, this is how would I feel. And then living as though every single day attached to the emotional feeling. And you talked about Simon Sinek, right? What's this book? It starts with why,
Yep.
right? And teaches people to have that why that's got to be bigger than you. And it's not about getting the goal, it's about the growth that occurs in the process and who you become in the
Yeah.
process. I am not the same person today, June 25th, 2025, as I was on January 1st, 2025. as I was on January 1st, 2024. Like there's always that evolutionary growth. I'm going to be a different person in 3 more months from now. So
And
when you're
so
talking, go
yeah,
ahead.
if you tie that back to the value of, say, writing in a journal,
Hmm.
is you get that opportunity to reflect on the growth, right? It's not just about the goal, it's about what happened during your pursuit of the goal. And the great thing about that is using a technique like that, journal writing, you
Hmm.
can start to replace your addiction for dopamine on a device with the addiction of dopamine that you get from reflecting on the progress that you've achieved. And so you, again, taking a negative detrimental habit and shifting it into a positive nurturing habit. Now you're still getting that dopamine hit. You're just getting it through a different format, one that isn't negatively impacting your health, your mental wellness. Um, so that's just an example of how you can leverage some new habits to replace some of those more negative habits that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that building of creating those new habits and holding yourself accountable to them.
Mm-hmm.
And not setting something that's such the world's biggest habit that if you don't achieve it, that you don't identify yourself as, well, I failed. I proved to myself again that I can't do this, right? And I know even internally with us, with our company, when we're, setting goals for our company and measurable goals that we set, an annual, like a BHAG type of goal, big, hairy, audacious goal that was,
Yep.
Jim Collins. But then we break it down into quarterly goals and what are we going to achieve this quarter that's going to help us achieve with that 12 month? But then you have to break down those quarterly and go, what is it that I'm going to do this week to achieve that? And then when I work with people or when I talk to people on our team, I'm like, what did you do today just to move that needle forward a little bit? Because every single step forward, every time that needle inches forward and those small incremental shifts, that's how we ultimately get to that big goal. And you don't always have, like, a lot of people like, well, I don't even know how I'm going to achieve that. Don't worry about how you're going to achieve it. Do you know why you want to do it? If you know why you want to do it, the how will come together for you.
It's fascinating, as you talk about quarterly goals. One of the thoughts that comes to my mind around how you can see just how truly dysfunctional as a society our mindset is around goals is the way that our financial systems work, right? Which
Hmm.
is everything is based off of these quarterly earnings calls. Performance, the way that we value, right, and where we want to invest ourselves tends to be based off of these very short-term, finite, and again, relatively meaningless goals. And so, as a society, we can already see that this has become a very entrenched mindset.
Hmm.
That the way I am going to measure success is whether or not I hit a superficial, arbitrary target, right? That has no more meaning other than a number, right? Um, and so that you can see that in that format. I mean, my desire and the reason that I want more individuals to recognize their innate leadership is because it's going to take, and this is equally applicable to politics too. Like we keep hoping that there's like this one charismatic figure that's just going to come out of nowhere and is going to fix the system. And but all of us understand that isn't the way that the world works, right? That so what it's going to take is it's going to take all of us collectively, right, stepping up, all of us
Hmm.
doubling down and investing in our own leadership abilities so that we can collectively start to reshape whether it's the economic systems or the political systems. Like it's going to take all of us maturing ourselves as leaders to be able to change that status quo. And I think for far too long we have hoped for kind of that singular figure that could come in and just set things right for us and life would
Yeah.
just become perfect. But it's not going to happen. That's just
Right.
not going to happen. Like, we all have to recognize and own our part in the story if we want to change that narrative.
I'm going to use this as a great point to kind of wrap everything together here when you talk about that. How do we achieve that as a society when you have the left, you have the right, you have the far left, you have the far right, you have your extremes? How do you bring everybody together for one common narrative that's good for all? And sometimes when I hear that, like the one thing that sometimes pops in my head, I'm like, what would it be like if we had a one world government,
Mhm.
all operating for the same common objective, the same common goal? How do you bring people together to collectively, as you just said, step up and do so in unison without
So there's
conflict?
well, conflict is not a bad thing.
Right.
So, so just a couple of things that I would nuance in that. So the first thing is kind of, you mentioned like one common goal.
Hmm.
I'd say, you know what? We're not all going to have the same goals, and that's totally fine. We can buy into a shared vision. And the differentiation between vision and goal is, vision is long term. It's something that we are moving in the general direction of. There is not this expectation, though, that there is like a summit that you're going to reach, and we've reached Shangri-La. Um, if we are able to get, and it doesn't have to be everybody, right? If we look at kind of the science of kind of the tipping point, and what does it take for major movements to actually achieve success, there's it's typically a smaller portion of society that will start that shift, and then the rest will slowly begin to follow. So I don't think it's too audacious to say that by having more people buy in to this vision of, I can be a leader, whether I have a title or not, whether I have a job or not, whether I have an education or not, whether I'm a parent or not, I can be a leader. I can have a positive influence on myself, on the people around me. Uh, you know, the beauty of leadership and emotional intelligence is wrapped up in effective leadership. The beauty of leadership is, you don't approach conversations and engagements with other people with a mindset of, how can I show that I'm the best? You approach it from a mindset of, how can I help, right? Where can I have an impact? And the more people that we have coming to the table, irregardless of what side of the political aisle they may fall on, what religion they may come from, what background, if they're coming to the table with that question in mind, how can I help? It changes the dynamics of the conversation.
Hmm.
Because instead of coming to the table with accusations and blame, and like, you're coming to the table to say, what's the problem we want to solve, right? And that piece falls into the bigger vision. I don't have the perfect, vision in front of me here, but generally speaking, the vision is, we want the world, we want people to have the opportunities to be able to achieve happiness, fulfillment, to feel included, engaged, right? It's summed up very nicely in the pursuit of, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Like, that's kind of the vision. And if we're coming to the table and say, okay, what problems do we need to solve to be able to make sure that we can move in the direction of that vision?
Hmm.
And how can I, in my individual leadership role, how can I help to do that? It'll start to give us the opportunity to see past kind of these partisan differences, to see past policy differences, and to really get to the heart of some of these really challenging and complex conversations.
Hmm.
And it'll also open the door for us to adopt more of an experimentation mindset, wherein we may say, look, we may try this social program to try to address this problem. We don't know if it's going to work or not. We believe it will. But if it doesn't, that doesn't mean that it like was some nefarious plot to undermine somebody else, right? It doesn't mean that anybody came into this with bad intentions or bad faith. Like, we tried something, we collected the information from it, we can see what worked, what didn't, and we adapt and we shift. You know, these days, when you hear people talk about whether it's healthcare reform or tax reform or any of these topics, like, you can clearly see that they're already arming themselves up to place blame, if it doesn't work, or to spin it in a way that makes it look like if it does work, that it worked for other reasons. It's because all of these conversations, they're starting with a premise that is not based in how can I help.
Right.
They're all tied into some form of how does this benefit me? And I think, if nothing else, if we can get more people to recognize and tap into their leadership abilities and to start asking those questions, how can I help, instead of defaulting to how does this benefit me? I mean, we would see some radical changes in
Massively radical.
in the way that the world kind of functions.
Right. And like you just said, right, like these are not partisan issues, right?
No,
This to do this, right? We can put the partisan aside and say this is a nonpartisan thing that we do here. And I think going beyond how can I help to how can I help and here's some suggestions, right? Like I'm a big believer in it. If you're bringing a problem to the table,
yeah,
bring a solution. It doesn't mean it's the solution, but start thinking of how can I contribute to solve this problem.
yeah. So I think back about 7 years ago, I was leading a program in the FBI, and we were trying to solve a pretty challenging IT issue that was it was creating poor performance in some of our systems and tools for the people, right, that are out in the field, that, like, they're the ones that are actually touching and supporting, the American citizens. And I'm in this room with people from across a bunch of different components of the organization. And when I asked the question, what are the problems that we need to solve? The conversation very quickly devolved into a finger pointing, blame game. Everybody wanted to point out why other people in that room were part of the problem, how they had contributed to creating the problem. And after a few, after I mean, after quite a while of this kind of back and forth, I sat down with other people on my team and said, guys, we need to figure out how to turn this conversation around, because right now it's not going in a productive direction. And so we developed a strategy of, like, how do we get all of these? They all have, different perspectives. They all have different opinions. They're all
Hmm.
very smart. There was nobody in that room that I would say, I would say, oh, they were dumb, or they were stupid, or their ideas were not valid. All very intelligent, smart people. But it was clear that they were so hyper focused on the challenge at hand, or on their particular opinion of the thing, that they were losing sight of our broader purpose, right? And so, when you walk into our headquarters in DC, for at least as long as we're still there, you walk in the main doors, and plastered right there on the wall is our mission statement: to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution of the United States. That is something that is a kind of, for almost every employee, right? That is one of the primary drivers that they have for why they show up to work every day, why they work so hard, put in so much effort. So when we went back into this meeting, I said, hey, everyone, I understand there's a lot of history to why we have these problems. And we can spend days, weeks, going through all the reasons why different people contributed to that problem. But I said, why are we all here today? Why are you part of this organization? And by redirecting their thoughts to we are here to protect the American people, I was able to then lead the conversation saying, if we don't have a functioning IT capability, we can't meet that mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so by refocusing all of these very smart subject matter experts on the mission, on that vision of what we are trying to achieve, the conversation shifted. And suddenly it was, okay, here are the problems that we recognize. And they started pointing to very specific problems. And then we were able to lead the conversation to say, what are some different ways or ideas that you have on how we could address these specific problems? And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, that ended up leading into a full build out of a strategy on how to solve those problems. Being able to redirect our attention, right, back to that common vision, that vision that we can all buy into, that we can all agree upon. We all want life, liberty. We all want to be able to have that pursuit of happiness. The more people that we can get that recognize that leadership ability, that recognize they have the opportunity to contribute, that start to shift their mindset to how can I help in this grand endeavor? I think the more that we will be able to pull back from what we are seeing today, which is a deep radicalization of ideologies. And I mean, if you sit down with, I think, with most individuals, and you were able to have an honest conversation about what they think on any particular issue, I think you would realize that we have so much more in common. There's going to be little nuances and slight differences of where we fall on the spectrum of any given topic or issue. But there's so much more we have in common than we have that differentiates us. The problem that we see, though, is the way that our systems are currently architected is attention, which translates to revenue, is dictated by how emotionally charged and captivated can I keep my audience. And so the reason that I don't think we're going to be able to program our way out of this. I mean, you could pass legislation to dictate, algorithms have to be, retrained a certain way or whatever. The reason I don't think we're going to be able to program our way out of this is because at the end of the day, like, everything is going to get tweaked to try to capitalize and drive that revenue amount. If on the other side of this, though, we change the population, if we change the customer, if we change the individual, and they develop their internal leadership ability, and they develop their self-awareness, and they develop their critical thinking skills, and they develop their ability to recognize when their emotions are getting influenced, and they can begin to proactively apply intention to their decision-making abilities, then I think we have an opportunity where it doesn't matter how the algorithm is trained up. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're starting to inoculate the population against the negative influences that it may drive. And instead of leading with who's to blame or how do I benefit, or they're coming at the world from that perspective of how can I contribute? How can I help? Who can I serve? And so I think that is a huge, huge kind of mindset pivot that our society desperately needs.
Oh, absolutely. And as you're telling that story, I can picture in that room, not to paint everybody with the same brush, but making an assumption there's a lot of A-type personalities, right? A-type
Absolutely.
personalities in that room. And, individuals, everybody has an ego. We all have one. And so how do you cast that aside? And I'm almost picturing, you guys need like a Chris Voss type of never split the difference, and I'm sure guys who are in that room who have been trained, on
Also
that
former bureau.
methodology, right? Former bureau guy, right? Like that have been trained on that methodology to go, well, how am I going to get my idea? How is my position, right? But then we
Yeah.
I don't know if over weaponize it is the wrong term, but we overuse it and not the common goal gets thrown out the window. But I love the
Yeah.
way
I
that
mean,
you wrap that up and you bring it back on track to what is it that we're trying to achieve here?
yeah. You know, it, as with most things, right? Ego is it can be a problem, but it can also be a valuable asset, right?
Absolutely.
Ego gives us that self-belief. It gives us that confidence that we can achieve something that if you were to look at it on its face, you probably shouldn't believe you can do it. But that ego gives you that opportunity. I mean, it fuels the ability for us to have these Olympians.
Right.
Um, conflict. We touched a little on conflict. For all of the bad that conflict can create, conflict is actually the way that we solve problems. It's getting that conflict so that we recognize there's a problem here, and then getting ideas to pool in there, and then working through that process, figuring out what's the best idea, right?
Yeah.
So leadership gives us the ability to balance all of those elements. And I think that that's an important quality, both of emotional intelligence, but of leadership as well, is it helps you to instill balance. Um, I think so much of our challenges, they grow and they metastasize because we have allowed this broad imbalance to remain in a lot of these different areas. So yeah, helping to bring balance to some of these elements is important.
I love it. I love it. Brent, to wrap it up here, one question that I like to ask a lot of people, especially in the topics of leadership, are who are your mentors? Who have you looked up to, learned from, grown from as you've continued to evolve and, develop your own ability to get into leadership shape?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been so many. Both of my parents were 100% formative in helping me just build a foundation of what it means to be confident but kind, um, to push back against uh, you know things that you believe are unjust, and to give a little bit of background. So I grew up in a law enforcement family,
Hmm.
um, which kind of it sounds like it tracks right with how I ended up in the FBI. Interestingly enough, growing up, I had sworn off law enforcement as any type of future career.
Okay.
I was convinced that I had seen the full cycle of the criminal justice system in my household, and I was like, I'm good. I got to experience it. I don't need to make a career out of it. So it was interesting to, after about 10 years in my private sector career, to find myself with this opportunity to go into the FBI, and and to see the excitement that both of my parents had upon learning that I was going to be accepting a job offer with them.
Hmm.
But yeah, both of my parents were extremely informative. I came from a small town in northern Utah of about 3,000 people or so. Now we lived within driving distance of a bigger city, but one of the beauties of growing up in kind of that smaller setting, you get to know your neighbors. Um, it's one of those kind of ecosystems where kind of everybody knows everybody. When you're walking down the street, you're waving at people, and everybody kind of knows. Now there's sometimes some downsides to come to that, like everybody knowing everybody else's business, uh, but that community feel, um, I mean, I think that is another element of a trend in our society that I think is very detrimental is we spend so much time now behind screens instead of out with other people, right? Again, tying back to this is another quality of leadership is you need to be with and around people. You need to be having real conversations with them and not just kind of basing all of your decisions off of something that's being fed to you. But a lot of the members of the community were very formative. I mean, I remember I would be able to leave my house, in the morning, tell my mom I was going to go hang out with my friends,
Yeah.
and I'd bounce around between different houses in the community, and you'd get exposed to different ideas. You'd hear the opinions of my friends' parents, and they didn't always agree on different things, and you get exposed to that and you hear it, but you also see that they're able to maintain friendly relationships, and they're
Hmm.
able to have productive interactions. So I think that was very beneficial. Um, and I've been fortunate to uh, whether it's bosses, supervisors, both inside my current job at the FBI, outside in the private sector. I think that being able to look at each individual and recognize they're human, which means that they're not perfect. So there are
Yep.
going to be some things that they're going to do that aren't going to rub you the right way, but still being able to recognize the good qualities that they have. So, I mean, even in relationships where I could pretty objectively say, like, I felt like my supervisor was pretty bad, I was still able to recognize the good qualities that they had. I was still able to recognize the wisdom that they were able to share that absolutely I could apply and would benefit me. Um, so, I think a lot of that obviously comes from that foundational mentorship from my parents. The other thing that I'll just double tap that I think is also kind of it's a mix. I see a lot of people doing it more now, which is good. But reading, some of my best mentors have been some really good books,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's books from Simon Sinek or Brene Brown or any of these other Adam Grant, like all of these authors, while you may not have the opportunity to meet them in person, have conversations with them, the ideas and the 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 insights that they are able to capture in their written word
Yeah.
can be hugely impactful on shaping your perspective of the world. So yeah, there's a lot, but I would definitely say that my parents were a really really big influence from a mentor perspective
Yeah.
in my life.
I love it. It's some of the, when you just talked about even having poor leaders, some of the best leaders I've ever had were the ones that were terrible at leadership because they taught me all of the things not to do. And there's a lot of value in that and a lot of lessons in learning from people with that. And I do agree with you on books too. And it doesn't have to be the latest New York Times bestseller. I mean, some of these books are timeless. They're classics. I talked about Jim Collins earlier in this. I read that book 20 years ago, Good to
Yeah.
Great and Built to Last. And actually, I remember being like a 20-year-old kid at the time, and I actually emailed him a question about the book, and he emailed me back, like, because you just said, you may not be able to ever talk to these people or meet them, but you'd be surprised, when you reach out to people, what you may get back and how you can continue to learn. And I think that objective is just always committing to the continued development, the continued learning. Much as you have, Brent. Thank you for the work that you do working in the counterterrorism division within the FBI. For somebody to that job, I'm sure is no small feat. I'm sure it is very time consuming, but to be able to still contribute and build up that leadership side of yourself for yourself and for others, whether organizationally or what you do, however else you may moonlight outside of your day job. So thank you for your contribution to both of those on both ends. as we wrap this up, for any organizational leader that's listening, I don't care whether you're from in an administrative role, VP to C-suite level. The topics that we talk about here on Shield the Vulnerable, surrounding workplace violence, human trafficking, exploitation, are all things that I truly believe that we're all 1 degree removed from, and knowing somebody that's been impacted. And when it happens, and these are highly unspoken of things, people don't talk about them because of fear, embarrassment, lack of knowing what to do, but they're things that are going on within your organization, and showing people from a leadership perspective that you care about the culture of your employees, you care about the safety of your employees, and providing them with the tools and resources they need to feel safe and secure within your workplace is one thing as a leader that you can always do. And it's not about necessarily knowing how you can do it, as Brent said, but how can I help? How can I contribute? And by helping to protect your people as we move towards a society that contributes to a bigger, greater cause, one that's greater than all of us, that's nonpartisan, that doesn't lean on our own ideologies and beliefs, and it's okay to have different beliefs, but how can we contribute to an overall stronger, safer society? And that's what we're talking about here at Shield the Vulnerable. Brent, your perspectives, the way in which you explained everything, your storytelling amongst it is it's captivating, it's engaging. So thank you for being a guest here with us today and sharing all of those insights.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
Hey, Brent, if people wanted to connect with you and talk to you about leadership, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can connect with me directly on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. I try to get an article. It's probably an article a month or so for the leadership Get into Leadership Shape newsletter. You can also find me on Substack if you look up Leadership Lifestyle. So a couple different ways you can connect with me, and I'm always happy to engage with folks.
Amazing. Amazing, Brent. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody, that is another episode of Shield the Vulnerable. We'll see you on the next one.